This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 81 of Here's How for the 13th of December 2018. Talk of a united Ireland being a possibility is going at a rate that I've never heard before, but not everyone is convinced. Let's hear from someone who I'm pretty sure is not a supporter.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
Coming up on today's podcast.
My unionism is my sovereignty, my birthright, and I'm not going to give that up. If you offered me streets paved in gold in an All Ireland, I wouldn't accept it.
It's a principle for you.
It's a principle. Some things that money can't buy. You know, I would lie on the street before that I would sell my own birthright and everything that the generations before me fought and died to maintain.
That's coming up in a moment, but first, homelessness has been in the news a lot recently, as it deserves to be. In most normal societies, even though it's not really polite to say so, homelessness, in the sense of people living on the streets or in very marginal accommodation, that's a very different issue to the high prices in the rental and property market and the difficulty for people to find a place to live. The bottom line is that in most normal societies, to the extent that people living on the streets can be regarded as a normal thing, that type of homelessness isn't an accommodation issue. It's not really a housing issue at all. It's a mental health issue, often closely associated with alcoholism and drugs of abuse. People, when threatened with losing their accommodation, can usually access social services or, at worst, find a friend or relative who can put them up on a couch until they get sorted. People who have addiction and other mental health issues find it much harder to do that, often because their problems have alienated them from those support networks. They have problems, we need to address those problems, but they're not actually housing problems. It's a sign of how serious our situation is that people who are clearly together in other areas of their lives, they have relationships, children to care for. We have homeless children. Think about that, children who are homeless. And that's a sign of how serious the situation is. For thousands of people, the reason that they're homeless is that there just isn't a home for them. That's not normal by any standard. And we have so many suggestions for a solution to the housing crisis. Podcast listeners might know about Dr. Carl. If you don't know him, look him up. He's worth it. Anyway, he's a medical doctor. And one observation that he likes to make is that if a disease has one cure, then that cure probably works. If a disease has many cures, probably none of them work. The reasoning is simple. If you have a cure that works, why bother researching to find a second one? And if you have more than one cure, surely one works better than the others, so why not ditch the worse ones? This is true of our housing crisis as well. There are lots of nonsense solutions proposed. I'm just going to look at one. Airbnb is being held up as a villain. Thousands of homes are being rented out at huge profit when they could be used to house needy people, or so the narrative goes. And it's true there are about 23,000 listings for Airbnb in Ireland. But the story just doesn't add up. First off, many Airbnb listings are for people's spare rooms. They make some money on the side by renting out the room to tourists. They probably don't pay tax on it. That's a whole other issue, but it's an issue for a different day. There are about 8,500 entire homes advertised on Airbnb at any given time, but a significant portion of them are not the same 8,500 all the time. There are people who go on holidays or are away for a short time themselves, and while they're away, they make some money by letting out their house. And yes, tax issues, also planning issues, but again, no, different issue. There are actually only 7,000 dwellings on Airbnb that seem to be for short-term rent throughout the year. Well, 7,000. Wouldn't that house 7,000 families? That's about the size of the housing problem. Well, yes and no. First of all, even if we have a shocking homeless figure, like many of the Airbnb lettings, it's not the same people all the time. Some people are getting housed, others are falling into homelessness. In a country of nearly 5 million people, 7,000 dwellings is trivial. To put it in context, in 2006, we built 90,000 dwellings. 90,000. So that 7,000 was about 1 month's worth of building. If you buy into that analysis, then the homelessness problem would disappear in a month. Well, we're not building at that rate now. There'll be about 15,000 completions this year. But even at that rate, the housing problem should solve itself within 4 months. And that's clearly not happening. The flaw in this thinking is that it doesn't recognize that we have a systemic problem. It's the same problem as the proposals to build prefabs, the proposals to build on city parks, the proposal to cajole elderly people to move into smaller houses, the proposal to do away with building standards as if the cause of homelessness was the outlandish desire not to have to sleep in the same room that you cook, and all the other half-baked ideas scrawled on the back of a beer mat in the Dáil bar. We have all these solutions because none of them work. And we don't have the one solution that actually works because it offends too many people. In Ireland, we don't tax property. This is simply crazy. It doesn't mean that we pay less tax, for sure, but we pay tax on income and on sales. We tax economic activity, but economic inactivity gets off scot-free. Every other country balances their tax around a whole wide range of items, including property taxes. And it doesn't take a genius to work out that if you tax brown bread and you don't tax white bread, people will buy more white bread. So in Ireland, all our taxes are piled onto economic activity, onto job creation, onto adding value. So all the talent, the innovation, the investment, and the energy that should be going into that is instead going into property speculation. It means that Ireland, by far the most thinly populated country in Europe, has by far the highest land prices. And we can't change it because people want their children to be able to get on the housing ladder, but not as much as they want their own house price to keep going up. The cure to homelessness is the one pill that people just won't swallow.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
On the line now, I have Jamie Bryson. Jamie is a well-known Loyalist activist. He's the editor of UnionistVoice.com, and he came to prominence a couple of years back during the flag protests in East Belfast. Jamie, we're hearing an awful lot about Brexit. You're in the north, so you had a vote. Did you vote in the referendum? How did you vote?
Oh yes, I voted. I campaigned for and voted to leave the European Union. And
how do you feel it's going?
Well, I think the deal that the Prime Minister came back with was quite frankly appalling. I think there has been a concerted attempt by what I would term the liberal elite, the establishment, to try and stop Brexit and to try and overturn the democratic will of the British people. So I think that's been very disappointing. I think at this point in time we are heading towards a no-deal situation, which from day one, after the vote, I said at the beginning that is what we should look to, because there was never any incentive for the European Union to offer the United Kingdom any type of deal that would be beneficial, because the European Union wanted to send a message, wanted to punish the United Kingdom for daring to stand up to them and voting to leave. And I think that's the type of deal that we have on the table now. So I don't think any Democrat, any British citizen could support that deal.
Okay. I don't want to argue the rights and wrongs of Brexit with you. That's been done to death. You have your view. Would you accept that In Northern Ireland, there was about a 56% Remain vote, but opinion polls since then seem to have a significant advance. Much more people now. One poll more recently had people supporting Remain at 71%. So even within the Unionist community, that would indicate that your view, however valid it is, it's certainly not covering everybody. It's possibly not even a majority.
Well, no, I don't accept. There's 2 points in that. The first point is that this argument about which way various parts of the United Kingdom voted just is intellectually vacuous. There's no basis to that, because the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union as one United Kingdom. So it was a UK-wide vote. If we're going to get into, are we going to start breaking down cities and towns and streets as to who voted to leave and who voted to remain? Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. That is a key
sure,
part.
Yeah, but I just want to talk to you about unionist opinion. You'd accept that most unionists now, it seems, are on the Remain side.
Absolutely not. That is an absurd suggestion. The DUP are by far and away the largest unionist party. There is not a single unionist politician, not a single unionist party within Northern Ireland elected who has supported this deal. So I think it's absolutely absurd to suggest that the majority of unionism support this deal. The vast majority of unionism do not support this deal, completely oppose it. And what I would say about a number of these opinion polls is the people who take part in these opinion polls are, as I alluded to previously, quite often the liberal elite, the type of politicos, as you would call them, who are the mainstay of sort of the commentary world and that type of thing. These people are almost predominantly nationalists or upper class.
No, hold on, Jamie. I accept what you say, that unionist politicians are overwhelmingly in favour of leave, not least the DUP. That's obviously correct. But an opinion, for example, in July from Cognizance, which is a reputable polling company, put Remain supporters in Northern Ireland at 71%. Are you questioning the reality of that?
I'm not questioning that they evidently polled people, and that's the result that they come out with. But I'm questioning who they polled and who takes part in these polls. Well,
they do polls before elections, and they come out largely correct.
Well, the majority of working class unionist people and unionist communities do not take part in these polls and are approached in relation to these polls, and are quite often, left behind in a sense. As I say, these type of polls is the politicos, and which is dominated by a liberal elite, which is overwhelmingly nationalist. So that's why you get the results you do in those polls. Don't forget the predictions that the United Kingdom would heavily vote to remain.
The prediction was that it would narrowly vote to remain.
Well, and what happened?
It narrowly voted to say it was out by 3 or 4 points.
Well, by 4 points. I think it was
a crucial 4 points, though.
The people voted to leave the European Union. So polls are wrong, but I say overwhelmingly these polls focus on people, because that's the type of people that participate. Is what if the type of people who have started terming themselves civic nationalists are the type of people that take part in these polls. Working class unionist communities, I don't think I've ever heard anybody telling me that they take part in these online polls or however they're surveyed, so I don't put any stock in these polls whatsoever. The United Kingdom voted by the largest democratic vote ever to leave the European Union. That is the position of the United Kingdom, and Northern Ireland is an integral part of that.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's a reasonable opinion to hold. But what I want to do is, and I'm going to I'll play for you a couple of clips. I just want you to comment maybe on whether there might have been some shift in opinion in unionist feeling. Just to start off with, a clip from the 1980s, 1985, I think, from Ian Paisley Senior, as we might call him, the man who founded the DUP.
And yet Mrs. Thatcher tells us that republic must have some say in our province. We say never, 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 never.
That's Ian Paisley reacting to the Anglo-Irish Agreement. And I just want to contrast that to a couple of other, what you might call civic unionists. First of all, Ian Marshall, he was the president of the UFU, the Ulster Farmers Union, and certainly from a unionist background.
It's ideas that are being floated that were beyond consideration before, and certainly wouldn't have been entertained by anyone, including myself, in unionism. Some are thinking now the unthinkable. I think the demographics have changed, circumstances are different, and I think when we look to the future, then we have to be mindful of what's gone before and what the opportunities are.
And then there's Professor Jim Dornan. He would be a consultant doctor, quite a prominent unionist in Northern Ireland, obviously from a very middle-class background.
I would traditionally be thought of as being quite happy with the union, and I have been. It's been very good to me, the union, for educationally and health-wise and everything else in my life. But it's not so much as that I'm thinking the unthinkable. I think everything is on the table at the present. And there's a lot of people nowadays, and not just me, who are saying, you know what, if somebody offers me a better deal and somebody offers me a good deal, then I would go for it.
Those are two unionist voices. You'd have to agree, Jamie, that the tone has changed at least.
What so shall it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his own soul? That's what I would say to those last two individuals. In relation to Ian Paisley was right in the 1980s, and he was wrong whenever he essentially accepted the Belfast Agreement in 2007 in all its parts. So, what Ian Paisley said in the 80s at the Ulster Says No was absolutely correct. The Republic of Ireland shouldn't have any say within Northern Ireland, and the notion that, especially by the two individuals on at the end there, that essentially if for economic reasons it was more beneficial that we would surrender our birthright and our sovereignty for that, I just find that absolutely appalling, and that's not something that I would ever countenance. To be quite frank, I would rather lie on the street choking in my own blood than give up my sovereignty and my birthright for economic or financial reasons.
Arlene Foster said recently that if there was a board of vote and it voted for Northern Ireland to join the Republic, that she would feel like she couldn't continue living in Northern Ireland. Would you feel the same way?
Well, I think people would have to assess that at the time. And what's very interesting about the Belfast Agreement is that unionism has to win every time. Nationalism only has to win once. It's entirely slanted. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that nationalism are trying to use pan-nationalism, as I would call it, in Northern Ireland in the form of Sinn Féin Alliance and the SDLP, are trying to use Brexit as a Trojan horse to advance their objective of all-Ireland harmonisation, because all-Ireland harmonisation, open borders, was the key tenet which underpinned what I call the spirit, as you were, of the Belfast Agreement, and therefore by leaving the European Union there's a clearly defined land border between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, which is entirely legitimate and proper that there should be, and of course this seriously damages nationalism's harmonisation agenda. And let me make this point too, Sinn Féin for many years strongly opposed the European Union.
Yeah, they seem to have forgotten about that now.
They have forgotten about that because they see it as an opportunity, as a Trojan horse to advance their All-Ireland agenda. That is all it is. It's a means to an end for them, and that is why they're clinging. They've all of a sudden became the most strongest European Union supporters there could possibly be, when prior to that, Sinn Féin were totally opposed to the European Union. So, I think it's a strange turn of fortunes for them, and I think you can see the political opportunism.
It may well be, but Jamie, mightn't it be the case that they've gotten a message from their electorate?
In what sense?
In the sense that they were out of step with their electorate, and they were much, much smaller at the time that they were vehemently against the EU. But they might well have gotten a message that from their electorate that they are not willing to go along with an anti-EU line, and that they, in particular, in the border counties on both sides of the border, want the benefit of the EU, as they would see it, of not making the border an obstacle to trade or socially or anything else.
Well, you have to understand that Sinn Féin is essentially a cult, and the majority of those who would vote for Sinn Féin and have voted for Sinn Féin over the years have been taken in by this cult. There's many young people, and if you listen to them, they're almost parroted. It's almost as if they churn them out of some kind of factory. They parrot the lines put out by Sinn Féin.
But Jamie, they get 30% of the vote in Northern Ireland.
It is a cult, and the majority of people voted for them are taken in by the cult of Sinn Féin. Whatever Sinn Féin said, their electors would go along with, and always will, because they see it as a vehicle to advance national. You seriously think the majority of people in West Belfast and Ardoyne and nationalist communities really care about being in the European Union? Of course they don't. What they care about is using the European Union as a vehicle to advance their ultimate objective of an All-Ireland. And if Brexit goes how I want it to go, the Belfast Agreement is dead. The Belfast Agreement has gone. The strongest tool that nationalism have to advance their objective is dead in the water, and that is why that they're clinging on so desperately to try and use the European Union as a means to advance their own political objectives.
I hear what you're saying on that, Jamie, and I don't want to fight that fight with you, because I think everybody knows your point of view and everybody knows Sinn Féin's point of view, and it's not terribly entertaining to have them all repeated. But what I'm really interested in here is, and I can hear that you're not included in this, but would you not agree that there is, or at least there appears to be, amongst some unionists, a softening, and they're feeling that Brexit might not turn out all that well, and if it doesn't, a good safety net is their Republic of Ireland passport?
Absolutely not. No.
You don't think any unionists feel that at all?
I think there are some people who would sell their own granny if it provided some economic or financial advantage to them. So, in regard to those people, they're not genuine unionists. They're unionists because it suits them for the economic position. If it suited them to be nationalists. If you then
define unionists that much more narrowly, isn't it possible that you're going to define unionists into a minority?
Well, look, I actually do think that the benefits of staying within the United Kingdom are economically beneficial, and there's a strong unionist argument for that. I'm talking about my unionism is it does not depend on an economic argument. My unionism is my sovereignty, my birthright, and I'm not going to give that up. If you offered me streets paved in gold in an All Ireland, I wouldn't accept it.
It's a principle for you.
It's a principle. Some things that money can't buy. I would lie on the street before that I would sell my own birthright and everything that the generations before me fought and died to maintain.
How confident are you that all unionist young people who have ambitions to get a good job, to travel the world, how confident are you that they all agree with you on that?
Well, many working class unionists are very want to get a good job and want to work hard and want to advance and better themselves. So, if there's an implied notion that they wouldn't, I reject that. And secondly,
working class unionists.
Unionists. I think many unionists are strong on the union and believe in the union. And I actually think that this has hardened young unionists. I have people who, for example, maybe a couple of years younger than me, who wouldn't be at all political, wouldn't take any interest in politics whatsoever, were happily getting along with their lives, who are now all of a sudden very interested in politics and are appalled by the attempts to essentially turn Northern Ireland into some kind of de facto European Union, Republic of Ireland colony. And I think that what it has actually done is it has awakened a whole generation of unionists who otherwise wouldn't have been in any way politically engaged.
Okay. Looking back at opinion polls over the years, it was always very obvious that support for United Ireland within Northern Ireland was much lower than the proportion of people in Northern Ireland who would have been labelled as nationalists. So the nationalist label might have applied to maybe in the 80s and 90s 35, maybe 40% of people. If you put them on an opinion poll and said who wants a United Ireland now, they struggled even to get up to 20% support. And that wasn't terribly surprising because at that stage, people in Northern Ireland, even Catholics, even people who might regard themselves as nationalists, could have looked to the south and seen that it was economically very weak, that there was a very strong amount of social control essentially from the Catholic hierarchy, and the stability of the government wasn't very impressive. If those negatives could turn off anything up to half nationalists from being nationalists, isn't it possible that a large chunk of unionists could be turned off unionism if they see that GB is economically weak and unstable?
Well, for start, I don't think that the United Kingdom will be economically weak. I think there's massive
Sure, yeah, but you're a clever guy. You can answer a hypothetical question if that were to happen.
Well, hypotheticals are old. As I've already said, and I touched on at the start in the question in relation to the two unionists who played clips off at the end, there will always be people who would sell their own soul if it provided an economic advantage to them. There's nothing I can do about that. There's nothing unionism can do about that. And if people want to examine their own consciousness and they think their bank accounts are more important than their sovereignty, well, that's a matter for them. There's nothing I can do about that.
Okay, you were questioning the validity of the polls, and that's a reasonable thing to do. Opinion polls have been remarkably wrong in various prominent elections in recent years. But I'm looking at the BBC YouGov poll, where the Remain within the UK support is at 45%, Leave and Join the Republic of Ireland is at 42.1%. So in other words, the unionist majority is within a margin of error. If Karen Bradley were tomorrow to say that she thought there should be a border poll, would you be relaxed about that?
Well, I don't think there should ever be a border poll.
Sure, yeah, but it's possible it might happen, and would you be relaxed about it if it did happen?
No, I would never be relaxed about it because I'm opposed to the Belfast Agreement in its entirety. So therefore, I don't think that...
Sure, but would you be relaxed about winning it?
I don't think that the British state should ever be essentially holding up for the slaughter, the potential slaughter, part of their own sovereign territory. I think it's an absolute absurdity. I think the Belfast Agreement's an absurdity. So, it's all hypotheticals, but, I think the British government would need to have a long, hard look at themselves if they were to think that they were, especially in this climate, they were going to essentially hold Northern Ireland. Well, they essentially already have held Northern Ireland up for a potential slaughter. By
I know that you disagree with the principle, but it's something that could happen. And if it were to happen, a border poll, would you be entirely relaxed, think that we'll win this handily, or do you think that you'd be a bit more nervous about it?
I think A, unionism would win, but B, I don't think the provisions of the Belfast Agreement are acceptable, and I don't think they should ever be implemented. Because once you have a border poll, then you can have another one every 7 years until we get the result that nationalism wants. How is that fair and equitable?
That's a reasonable question. You alluded to it earlier. If you can have a border poll once every 7 years, and if the nationalists, people who want to join the Republic of Ireland, win once, then that's the end of the process. If the unionists win, then nationalists can come back for a second bite of the cherry once every 7 years.
And there's another key point to that. If nationalism does win, then Northern Ireland is subsumed into an All-Ireland. So the unionists in the geographical area of what would have then been Northern Ireland, what happens if a majority of those people want to rejoin the United Kingdom? Well, where's the provision for that to happen? Well, there isn't one, so it's not fair and equitable.
Yeah, that's certainly a reasonable point. It is remarkable that nobody on the unionist side made much of a deal of that point when the Good Friday Agreement was being signed.
Absolutely.
But one other thing that could happen is Scottish independence. Now, Scottish independence that was voted down 45 to 55 a couple of years back. It's possible that there will be a second independence referendum. And it seems to me that you'll be better able to comment on this than I am, but that when people in Northern Ireland, Loyalist, Unionist people, have a strong cultural affinity with Britain, that cultural affinity seems to be more strongly linked with Scotland than with England. You can even tell that just by the accents. If Scotland were to leave the UK, that would be hugely destabilising for Northern Ireland, wouldn't it?
I don't think Scotland's going to leave the UK, so again, I think it's hypothetical, and we can talk on hypotheticals all day. I think the people of Scotland, not in opinion polls, but where it actually mattered, at the ballot box, voted overwhelmingly to remain within the United Kingdom. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's a hypothetical. We could talk about all type of hypotheticals.
Sure, but answer that hypothetical.
I'll give you something that's not a hypothetical.
Okay.
Something that's not a hypothetical is the United Kingdom leaving the European Union with no deal, at which point would lead to a clearly defined border between Northern Ireland.
Well, technically it is a hypothetical, but it seems like a very likely one these days.
Yes, I take your point on that, but it's quite possible. It's more possible at the moment than Scotland or Northern Ireland voting to leave the Union.
Absolutely.
And if that happens, then the Belfast Agreement is dead. Harmonisation is dead. And I actually think the United Kingdom will be stronger than ever, because we will be an independent nation going about our business in the world, free to do trade deals, to make relationships with other countries, with other nations.
I'm not going to argue Brexit with you. I think that's for a different podcast. But I take your point, and that you support Brexit and so forth. But I think you can, even if you think that it is unlikely to happen, it's certainly not impossible for Scotland to vote for independence in the coming years.
Well, nothing's impossible.
And
but I don't think it's going to happen. I think the people have went to the ballot box and they rejected that option.
That's true, and voted in huge numbers. There was an enormous turnout. But you would agree that the cultural affinity that Unionists, Loyalists in Northern Ireland have for Britain has a very strong Scottish focus on it.
Well, the affinity that the Unionists in Northern Ireland have is an affinity as part of the United Kingdom. It's a United Kingdom identity. We're British citizens, and that is the common thread that binds us together. There's all sorts of, and yes, there's cultural links to Scotland, especially in relation to the bands community, in relation to the Orange Order, in relation to sport. Actually, many people from Northern Ireland travel over, on a weekly basis to follow the Rangers, and yes, obviously,
and some for Celtic.
well, yes, but not many unionists, and there would be that closer link. But we're part of the United Kingdom. We're not going to get fractured up into two different sections and pulled apart. The British identity is the identity of the United Kingdom, and Unionists within Northern Ireland are obviously have a close affinity with that, and that is our sovereign nation, and we're very proud of that.
Okay, I want to just play one very quick clip. This is the Reverend Alan Irwin of the Orange Order.
What safeguards will the Irish Republic give to us if we were ever to be a part of it?
Now, just to be clear, Alan Irwin was not like the others looking relatively favourably on Irish reunification. He was saying what he would say to others. But if I was a salesman in a used car dealership and somebody comes into me and says, well, what will you give me if I buy this? That says to me that they're not thinking it's entirely impossible that they'll buy the car. That seems like a prospect. That's somebody who I'm, working on for a sale. And I just want to ask you, I'm fully aware that, Irish unification would be something that you would not find palatable under any circumstances. But are there any circumstances that you would find it less unpalatable?
Well, let me make one point about the Reverend Darwin and the analogy you give. It depends if somebody voluntarily walks in to your car sales shop and starts discussing cars, or whether you've trailed them in off the street. So perhaps the man could have simply been asking a question that was put to him and was put on to him. Therefore, he didn't initiate the discussion. So I don't think we can hold that, take that from what he said. In any shape or form.
I'm not suggesting he agrees with that, but clearly, clearly it's something that's on his mind. But in any case, the substantive question: is there anything that would make it less? I'm not suggesting it would be something you'd like, but is there anything that would make it less unpalatable?
Nothing. There's nothing the Irish Republic could offer me that would ever make me want to sell my own birthright.
No. I'm not suggesting that you would want it. I'm just suggesting that is there anything that would make you resist it less?
No.
When you look, and I presume you're aware of events in the South, and you see the changes that have happened, say, since the 1980s or 1990s in terms of the collapse of the power of the Catholic Church, in terms of economic advancements and so forth, that have made that relative position of the North and the South quite different. How do you think that could be achieved for the North?
In what sense?
Well, in the sense that there's no question that, Ireland was the poorest country in the EEC as it was when it joined. It's now one of the richest. There's been an absolute sea change. It had to be bailed out by Europe. That happened once. All the economy is now stronger than ever it was. I'm not suggesting, I don't want to go into macroeconomic details, but to be blunt, I think we're doing better than Bulgaria. And the economic growth rates and whatever are the highest in Europe. But I'm not necessarily thinking about money. I'm thinking more about social change. There's been enormous social changes in the South. Do you think the North should either catch up or can catch up?
Well, I'm socially conservative, so no, I don't. And I think the changes within the Republic of Ireland are a matter for the citizens of the Republic of Ireland. It's not for me to tell them how to vote or to try and pressurise the people in the Republic of Ireland in relation to what social policies they want in their sovereign territory within Northern Ireland. As I say, I'm socially conservative. I oppose same-sex marriage. I oppose essentially abortion on demand, and therefore, I would campaign against that. If the majority of people decide to vote for that, and that is what they want, well then that is what has to happen. As a Democrat, you have to accept that.
Although, by the way, same-sex marriage is prevented in Northern Ireland not because there's a majority of people, or even in the Assembly, opposed to it. There isn't, but because the mechanism in the Good Friday Agreement that prevents petition of concern, exactly. So it allows a unionist minority, that's to say a majority of unionists, but a minority of the Assembly, to block that. What's your view on that?
Well, my view on that is if Sinn Féin, the Alliance and the SDLP want to, as they say, protect the Belfast Agreement in all its parts, and you can have it both ways. So if the system's there to be worked, well, fair enough, the unionists work it the same as everybody else. I oppose the Belfast Agreement. I would, happily do away with the petition of concern tomorrow, and if that meant that I would essentially lose the argument on some of the social issues, well, so be it. That's democracy. But at this point in time, that tool and that mechanism is there, and if nationalism want to do away with it, and want to do away with the Belfast Agreement, and let's start taking the Belfast Agreement apart, then I'm all for that. I'm the first person that's up for that discussion. Let's go, and let's put the Belfast Agreement in the bin, and let's have workable and durable devolution in a proper sense within Northern Ireland. So, the options there for nationalism. They can't have it both ways.
Okay. I don't think anybody was seeking to have it both ways, but they are certainly campaigning on the other side.
They are seeking to have it both ways because they want to protect the parts of the Belfast Agreement that suit them, but they want to amend or change the parts of the Belfast Agreement that don't suit them. So they are trying to have it both ways. They want to cherry pick the Belfast Agreement to suit themselves, meanwhile telling everybody we must protect the Belfast Agreement in all its parts as if it's a holy writ that Moses come down the mountain on. It is a nonsense. So if we're going to start amending and changing the Belfast Agreement, then let's do that. Let's put it in the bin. I'm all for that.
I don't think they're advocating that, although I take your point on what you say, and you clearly have a consistent line there in that you are willing to do away with that aspect of the Belfast Agreement, even though it might mean you losing on some other grounds that you are currently winning on. But I just want to close with one hypothetical. Arlene Foster said that she felt she would have to leave Northern Ireland if it was no longer part of the UK. And we discussed your disagreement with the mechanism of a potential border poll. But I'm sure you'd agree that if a majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to join the Republic, that it would be very difficult politically to argue that was the wrong thing to happen. But if it did happen, I'm sure you'd cry salt tears, and I can understand people would be, especially in unionism and loyalism, would be very hurt, maybe grief-stricken over that. But at the end of the day, if you were on the losing side, would you accept it?
Well, we're not in that situation, so I don't know.
No, we're not. But come on, you can answer the question.
Know.
You don't know?
I don't know. So, what that a foreign nation is going to take my country off me?
Oh no, not that if Northern Ireland, the justification for the existence.
A small part of the United Kingdom voted in a referendum that should never have been, by virtue of the iniquitous Belfast Agreement, to essentially allow one part of the United Kingdom.
Sure, come on, Jamie, you're a smart guy. We understand your argument against it, but it might happen. Would you be able to shake the hands of people, presuming that they came in good faith?
Would I be willing to accede to my country being robbed off me? No.
No, nobody's suggesting robbing it, but if the
well, it would be a robbery. It would be a robbery because we go back to how would it have happened. It would have happened by the iniquitous Belfast Agreement, where the United Kingdom.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Long before the Belfast Agreement, the British government was clear that the basis. Hold on, Jamie. The long before the Belfast Agreement, the British government were clear that the basis for the continuation of Northern Ireland was that a majority of its citizens wanted it to do so. If the majority of the citizens then support a different option, joining the Republic of Ireland, or indeed, as may well happen, majority of the citizens of the UK support that, including a majority in Northern Ireland, would you have the good grace to say, okay, well, I'll get involved on politics and do my campaigning? I still believe what I believe, but I'll campaign that on an all-Ireland basis.
Well, I can assure you one thing. I will never be campaigning on an all-Ireland basis. And I would be able to live with the potential for the referendum a little bit better if it was done in the context of the sovereign government protecting its sovereign territory. So if, for example, a majority of people within Northern Ireland and within the United Kingdom voted to surrender Northern Ireland to Dublin, well, that would be a different argument. But that, of course, is not what happens. The British government leaves part of its own sovereign territory hanging out on the whims of nationalists and, for example, a couple of the people that you played earlier, people who are economic unionists who are essentially only in it for their own financial gain. So, personally, I will continue to campaign for an end to the Belfast Agreement, and I will continue to campaign for more robust structure to be put in place for the United Kingdom to protect its sovereign territory in Northern Ireland.
Jamie Bryson, the editor of ulstervoice.com, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.
If you like the Here's How podcast, please rate and review the show on iTunes and other podcast providers. Share it on Facebook and Twitter. Tell your friends. But most of all, make your views heard. Call us on 076 603 5060.
I said the wrong thing there. Jamie's website is unionistvoice.com. You can go to the website for sources and references for everything we were talking about. And while you're there, please like the show on Facebook, follow @Here's How Podcast on Twitter, follow Jamie Bryson @Jamie Bryson CPNI, and get in touch with me if you can suggest a guest or topic for a future show. Also, you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. It's all at www.here'show.ie. And finally, there's a link to my Patreon account there. So if you'd like to make a small donation to help the podcast become more frequent with better research, I'd really appreciate that. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.